A calm river can now kill faster than a frontline trench. One FPV drone clip on the Dnipro makes that reality impossible to ignore, because the open water looks safe right up to the second it turns into a strike zone. A small boat does not get cover, and it does not get time, since the sky can see movement long before the people inside understand they have been found. That is the first shock. The second shock is that this same logic is now shaping land battles through pressure, isolation, and timing, not just through raw firepower. Kupiansk sits inside that shift, where the fight is happening on streets and tree lines, but also inside headlines, claims, and the need to prove control. One side talks like the city is already decided. The other side acts like the story is still being written in real time. And when cameras appear near the front, they are not only recording events because they are changing what audiences believe is true. This report connects the river trap to the town pressure, so the pattern becomes clear without giving away the full punch too early. Like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear reporting on modern weapons, real battles, and the politics behind them. This Dnipro intercept matters because it shows how a simple river run can collapse the moment the sky is owned. Russian troops try to move in small boats because that looks cheap and hard to notice. Ukraine answers with FPV drones that fly low and fast, and the hit comes while the boats are still midstream. That timing is brutal because there is no bank to rush back to, no wall to lean behind, and no trench to drop into. On open water, a crew has only seconds to react, and every move is visible once a drone is overhead. Even if one craft survives the first blast, shock and spray can slow it down, and slow movement invites another strike. That is where the story stops being about one boat and starts being about how Ukraine chooses the moment. A boat can hug reeds or a cluttered shoreline, but it cannot hide in an open lane where the water is flat and the background is empty. Ukraine's operators appear to wait until the target drifts into that exposed sector, and then they commit when the distance is short and the approach is clear. That patience matters, because an FPV does not need a huge charge if it arrives when the enemy cannot scatter. A near miss can still flip a light craft, injure the driver, or throw people into the water, and that chaos breaks the whole plan. The point is denial, since one failed crossing can freeze the next attempt through fear and hard math. Small craft once looked like a workaround when bridges were watched, but now the workaround is even harder than the bridge. And when denial takes hold, the river stops acting like a border and starts acting like a trap. Under constant aerial watch, the Dnipro becomes a dead zone. That is why a small wake can become a marker when drones linger overhead. The danger is not the water itself, but the air above it, which is filled with sensors and instant shooters. Daylight makes detection easier, but darkness is no longer a shield, since thermal tools can still catch motion and hand it off to the strike layer. This is what low-sky warfare looks like, because control of a thin band of air can decide what happens on the surface below. That changes the role of rivers, since they stop being neutral terrain and start acting like corridors under a ceiling of eyes. For an American viewer, the lesson is simple, because it feels like air superiority brought down to a few hundred feet. When the sky is this crowded, a crossing is not a trip, it is a timed test against surveillance. A commander is forced to ask different questions because courage is not the issue and speed alone is not the answer. The real problem is where the enemy can see, how long the craft must stay exposed, and whether the route offers any background to break the lock. If those answers are bad, the unit may still try, but it is gambling with people and with the credibility of the whole sector. Which is why the same low sky pressure will matter even more when the fight shifts from water to roads, supply lines, and the towns behind them. Ukraine's real advantage on the Dnipro is not just the FPV drone itself, but the way reconnaissance and timing turn a small crossing into a public warning. A river raid can be hidden for a moment, yet it cannot stay hidden if the route is watched, because surveillance is the first weapon in low-sky war. Operators do not need to chase every wake on the water, since they can wait until the boats enter a lane where the background is empty and escape options shrink. That choice is not luck, because it is built on simple field math, which is distance, speed, and the seconds it takes a boat to reach cover. When those seconds are long, the strike window is wide, and the attacker can be hit before anyone can even turn the bow around. That is why this kind of interception looks clean on video, but it begins long before the explosion, with patient watching and careful selection. And once the selection is made, the story becomes about control, not chaos. The news-style rhythm is simple because it is to observe, measure, commit, and finish. First comes the watch, where drone crews track movement and confirm it is not a decoy. Then comes the read of conditions, since wind can push a drone offline, current can change how the target drifts, and glare or shadows can hide small craft for seconds. Those seconds matter, because an FPV only needs one clean approach, and an open sector on the river gives that approach a straight line. When a boat enters that open sector, the decision is locked in, and the strike becomes more like a scheduled event than a reaction. The crew in the boat may believe speed is protection, yet speed only helps if it reaches cover, and cover does not exist in the center lane. So the moment that looked like a fast dash starts to look like a trap that was waiting. This is why the strategic meaning goes beyond one destroyed craft, because the strike is designed to change behavior. A small infiltration attempt is not only about who crosses, but about whether the enemy keeps trying tomorrow. If every crossing risks being filmed, tracked, and hit in seconds, then the river stops being a cheap option and starts demanding heavy planning. That pushes Russia toward bigger moves, like larger suppression efforts or more air defense support. Yet those moves cost time and resources that might be needed elsewhere. It also pushes troops toward riskier routes near reeds, rubble, or narrow channels, and those routes can create bottlenecks that are easier to predict. So a single hit can act like a loud sign, because it tells every unit on that river that the sky is not asleep. And when the sky is awake, the river is no longer a shortcut. The deterrent effect is strongest when it is believable, and the biggest proof is repetition. One successful interception can be dismissed as bad luck, but several similar outcomes force a change in tactics. That is why drones and reconnaissance work as a pair, because the drone is the punch and the watch is the hand that guides it. In modern war, the side that sees first often strikes first, and the side that strikes first usually decides where the fight happens. On the Dnipro, that means the fight happens in the most exposed water, not at the bank, because the bank offers hiding places and confusion. Out in the open, the target is isolated, and isolation is what makes a quick strike feel inevitable. That same idea, which is isolation before destruction, is exactly how this story begins to connect to Kupiansk on land. Kupiansk matters because the fight there is being described as a staged isolation campaign, where Ukraine tries to cut the lifeline first and only then squeeze the trapped units. The core idea is simple, because a town cannot hold if food, ammo, fuel, and rotations cannot reach it on time. So the story starts with the Oskil River and the supply corridors around it, since river crossings and road links act like valves that control how much pressure a force can survive. Ukraine says it regained much of the Kupiansk area and cut Russian supply routes, while Russia disputes that picture, and outside observers cannot fully verify every claim in real time. That matters for how this is reported, because a map line on social media can move faster than facts on the ground, and both sides know it. Still, the operational logic is clear, since isolation is the fastest way to make a garrison weaker without paying the cost of a direct front-door assault. That logic sets the frame for every strike and every push that follows. The campaign is described as multi-stage because it aims to reduce choices step by step rather than chase one dramatic breakthrough. The first stage is pressure on crossings and approach routes, since those are the places where vehicles must slow down, line up, and expose themselves. When a crossing point is watched, any movement toward it becomes a signal, and that signal can trigger fires from drones, artillery, or aircraft. The second stage is the steady removal of support nodes, like ammo storage, troop assembly points, and the buildings used to coordinate small assault groups. That does not need a huge number of strikes to matter, because a few well-timed hits can break rhythm delay resupply, and force units to fight on half planning. The third stage is ground pressure that tests the weak edges, because once supply is strained, even a small push can feel bigger than it really is. This is how a town gets squeezed without one big battle that resets the whole front. Air power is described as part of that squeeze, but it has to be handled with care, because different sources use different levels of proof. MiG-29s are often mentioned in relation to guided bomb use, and that is believable in a technical sense, because Ukraine has shown it can integrate Western kits onto older jets. Some reporting and clip-based accounts also claim F-16 involvement, yet those claims are harder to confirm from a distance, since footage can be cropped, mislabeled, or released without context. The safest way to frame it is this: Ukraine appears to be using air-delivered guided munitions to hit fixed points behind the immediate line, which can include troop clusters, ammo sites, and command positions. That role fits the isolation logic, because aircraft can reach deeper targets quickly, and one deep strike can disrupt an entire local plan. But without independent confirmation of each specific strike, the exact platform and exact weapon should stay in the reported category, not the proven category. That discipline keeps the analysis strong, because it separates what is likely from what is certain. The bigger point is what airstrikes do to movement, because movement is the oxygen of any defense or counterattack. If the routes into Kupiansk are under watch, then reinforcements cannot flow freely, and a unit cannot rotate out before it breaks. If storage and coordination points are threatened, then even forces outside the town have to spread out, hide longer, and move with smaller packages. That slows the pace, and a slower pace makes every convoy more predictable, which is exactly what drones and spotters want. In other words, the air layer does not have to win the battle alone, because it can make the ground layer fight with less freedom and fewer safe options. Once that happens, the next story becomes inevitable, since every attempt to push help forward has to run through a narrow funnel where drones can start grading every move in real time. Russian reinforcement attempts around Kupiansk are being described as a race against the sky, and the sky is usually faster. Light teams on ATVs and motorcycles look smart on paper because they try to slip through gaps and arrive before heavier fire can lock in. But speed only matters if the path stays unseen, and drones make unseen rare. Once a UAV catches movement, the drive stops being a dash and turns into a tracked line, because a camera can follow it and feed coordinates. That is why short clips keep showing mobile groups getting hit, even though exact loss numbers should stay unconfirmed without solid OSINT checks. The bigger point is the pattern, because repeated contact means commanders start losing choices, not only vehicles. That pressure is what shapes the rest of the fight. The tactical problem is simple, because these platforms trade protection for tempo. An ATV has no armor, so the crew's defense is to keep moving and keep the profile small. A motorcycle can cut through narrow paths, yet riders still must cross open ground where concealment disappears. If a drone catches them on a field edge, even a small strike can flip a vehicle, injure riders, and block the track behind them. That creates a chain effect, because one disabled machine becomes an obstacle, and obstacles create pauses, and pauses create targets. So the fast lane can turn into a fixed lane in seconds, and recovery becomes as dangerous as the initial run. This is where geography begins to join the killing process. Terrain and water can do what mines and wire used to do, because flooding and mud shrink the number of usable corridors. When the ground is wet, vehicles are pushed onto higher, firmer lines, and those lines are exactly where drones search first. Even if units try to spread out, they still have to touch the same hard points, like crossings, bridges, and the few reliable roads. That makes movement predictable, and predictability is what turns surveillance into strikes. A temporary fix, like an improvised track or a quick crossing, can fail fast if it becomes the only workable option for many groups. The terrain does not need to stop everyone, since it only needs to slow the flow and expose the rest. That slowdown is what makes the supply problem feel permanent. This is why geography as a weapon is not a slogan in this sector. because the landscape shapes the decision tree. A riverline is strong by nature, but it becomes harsher when the air layer watches every approach and punishes every attempt. A marsh belt is not lethal by itself, yet it becomes lethal when it funnels traffic into a narrow strip that is easy to track. Even a forest edge stops helping if drones can see the exit points, because the most dangerous moment is often the transition from cover into open space. In this setting, a relief effort becomes math, since it must move through limited ground under constant observation. So commanders may split into smaller packets, but those packets still collide at the same nodes, and that is where losses can stack. The story then shifts from movement to meaning. If one side can show that supply lines are failing and relief runs cannot get through, then public claims of control start sounding weaker before the map even changes. If the other side can deny setbacks and project confidence, it can buy time and reduce political damage. Kupiansk sits inside that tension because it is not only a military problem but also a test of whose narrative survives contact with evidence. So the last question is not just who holds a street today, but who gets to write the fallen or freed headline first. Kupiansk is now as much a credibility battle as a ground battle, because the side that controls the story can shape how the world reads the map. Ukraine is described as tightening the ring around remaining Russian positions, and that matters because isolation is not only a tactical move, it is also a public signal that the front is shifting. At the same time, fully liberated is a phrase that can run ahead of reality, since major outlets still describe competing claims and limits on independent verification. So the safest reading is this: Ukraine may be gaining control and squeezing supply routes, but the exact boundary of control can change fast, and it can look different depending on who is speaking. That caution is not weakness, because it is how serious reporting stays honest in a war where information is used like a weapon. And this is where Moscow faces risk, since the narrative can crack even before the last unit is removed. The information fight has a clear purpose because it targets morale, trust, and decisions at the top. When reporting from one side sounds overly optimistic, it can inflate confidence and encourage risky choices, including sending more troops into a bad position. Ukraine tries to counter that with visible proof, not only statements, because proof forces a response and limits how long denial can last. A leader's presence near the area works like a stamp, since it signals to people at home that the claim is real, and it signals to outsiders that the message is backed by action. That is why short videos and location cues matter so much, because they spread fast and they shape belief even while the military picture remains complex. Once belief shifts, it becomes harder to rebuild the old story. One number that drives debate is Ukraine's claim of close to 90% control of Kupiansk, while Russia rejects that picture. That figure should be treated as a claim, not a fixed fact. Yet it shows the frame Ukraine wants, which is that the fight is about pockets and exits, not a full city takeover. If that framing is even partly correct, then the real question is logistics, since isolated troops can hold for a time but cannot hold without steady resupply and rotation. So the key measurement is the condition of the corridors, because corridors decide whether a unit is still a force or already a trap. That is why careful analysis focuses on movement and supply pressure, not on victory words. Politics is tied to this phase because perception can influence talks, aid, and domestic patience. If the Dnipro is where drones turn open water into a kill zone, then Kupiansk is where isolation turns both the map and the narrative into one battlefield. Two stories share one logic, and that logic is spreading fast across this war. On the Dnipro, FPV drones turn open water into a trap, because a boat in midstream has no cover, no time, and no second route once it is seen. Near Kupiansk, the fight is described as isolation first, because cutting supply lanes and watching crossings can weaken units faster than a costly frontal push. At the same time, the information battle runs in parallel, since one side can claim control while the other tries to prove the opposite on camera. That is why reporting must stay careful, because fully liberated can become a slogan if independent checks are limited. The outlook depends on conditions. If the Oskil crossings stay under pressure and resupply keeps failing, Kupiansk could become a clear example of winning space by denial and timing. But if Russia improves short-range air defense, raises jamming, and keeps one durable corridor open, the fight may slide back into a grinding contest of endurance. So the open question is simple. Does this pattern keep tightening, or does it stall and reset? Like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear reporting on modern weapons, real battles, and the politics behind them.